In the quiet corners of a small town, nestled between the shadows of old brick buildings, lived a scrappy little puppy named Leo. He wasn't the kind of dog you'd find in a warm home with plush beds and treats galore. Leo had known nothing but the cold streets and the hustle of finding food and shelter. His tiny paws padded against the pavement, his fur matted from days without a proper bath, his eyes full of hope despite the hardships he'd endured. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leo noticed something unusual near an alley, a frail, starving cat huddled beneath a crate. The poor feline's ribs were visible under her thin fur, and she looked as if the world had long given up on her. Leo approached cautiously, his heart already aching for the cat's plight. He wasn't sure why, but something about her suffering pulled him in. Without hesitation, Leo stepped closer, offering her a small scrap of food he had found earlier that day. The cat, too weak to move, barely lifted her head. Leo watched her for a moment, his instincts telling him that something needed to be done. Leo, despite his own hunger and weariness, couldn't leave the poor cat to suffer alone. He nudged the piece of food closer, and the cat, after a long pause, reluctantly took the offering. This simple act would be the beginning of an extraordinary bond, one that would change the lives of both animals forever. But what happened next would melt even the hardest hearts. Leo, despite being homeless and just a pup, made it his nightly mission to bring food to the starved cat. Every evening, no matter how empty his stomach was, he would scour the alleyways and street corners, finding scraps and leftovers, just enough to share with his newfound friend. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger, and the once weak cat began to regain strength, her fur becoming shinier and her movements more energetic. Leo had no home, no family, but in his heart, he knew he had found something even more precious, a friend in need, and a purpose that filled him with a sense of joy he had never known before. This act of kindness, so simple yet so profound, would lead them both on a journey no one could have ever imagined. As Leo continued his nightly ritual of bringing food to the starving cat, something unexpected happened one evening that would change everything. It was a bitterly cold night, and the air seemed to bite at his fur, but Leo didn't mind. His small, determined form scurried through the streets, nose to the ground, searching for anything he could bring to his friend. He had grown accustomed to the routine, find the scraps, run to the alley, and share the little that he had. But as he neared the familiar spot under the crate, his heart sank. The cat was gone. The usual place where she lay, weak and hungry, was empty. Leo sniffed the ground frantically, his tiny paws scrambling through the litter and dust, but there was no sign of her. His ears perked up, and a deep unease settled in his chest. Something was wrong. With a growing sense of panic, Leo darted between the alleyways, desperately searching. His stomach ached with hunger, but the worry gnawing at him was far stronger than any hunger he had ever known. He barked softly, his voice hoarse and weak from the chill in the air, but there was no response. The streets seemed emptier than usual, and the night stretched on in eerie silence. Then, a faint sound reached his ears, a soft mewing, almost lost in the wind. Leo froze, his heart racing as he followed the sound. It was coming from a distant alleyway, far from their usual meeting place. With renewed hope, Leo trotted toward the noise, his body trembling from both cold and fear. As he turned the corner, his eyes widened in shock. There, tangled in some discarded plastic, lay the cat, her body limp and her breathing shallow. She had been caught in the debris, unable to free herself. Leo rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. He nudged her gently with his nose, but she barely stirred. The sight of her in pain, so fragile and helpless, struck Leo to his core. This wasn't just a simple moment of hunger. This was a desperate situation, one that could cost his friend everything. Leo knew that he couldn't leave her like this. But with no one around to help, it was up to him, just a homeless puppy with nothing but his heart and courage to guide him. Leo's heart raced as he nuzzled the cat, her body still limp, tangled in the trash. His tiny paws scrabbled at the plastic, trying desperately to free her. The night air seemed colder now, pressing in on him from all sides. His hunger gnawed at his stomach, but it was nothing compared to the fear gripping him. What if it was too late? What if she couldn't survive this? He let out a soft whimper, trying to rouse her, but the cat barely responded. Her fur was matted, and her breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps. Leo felt a surge of helplessness, but he refused to give up. With every ounce of his strength, he tugged at the plastic, tearing it away from her with determined urgency. Finally, with a final yank, the plastic gave way and the cat was free. Leo nudged her gently, hoping to see some sign of life. She blinked slowly, her eyes barely open, and let out a weak mewl. Relief flooded Leo's chest, but it was short-lived. The cat was still too weak to move. Leo knew he couldn't carry her. He had no strength for that. His mind raced, trying to think of a solution. He had seen people walking the streets before, but tonight, the streets were empty. He couldn't leave her here, alone and cold. And yet, Leo was in no position to help her on his own. He needed help, but who could he turn to? He didn't know how much time passed, but eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. Leo ran down the alley, barking as loudly as his small body would allow. There had to be someone, anyone, who could help. He didn't care if they didn't know him. He would do anything to save the cat. Meanwhile, across the town, a young woman named Emily sat in her small apartment, feeling an inexplicable pull to do something. She had always loved animals, but recently, she had felt something missing in her life. She glanced out the window, her thoughts drifting, when she heard a soft scratching at her door. Startled, she opened it cautiously, only to be met by the sight of a small, disheveled puppy with pleading eyes. He looked up at her, his little body trembling, his tail tucked low in fear. But it was the urgency in his eyes that caught her attention. He whimpered, looking back toward the alley as if trying to tell her something. Emily, puzzled but moved by the intensity of the puppy's gaze, grabbed a warm blanket and followed him out. As she walked down the dimly lit street, the puppy led her toward the alley where the cat lay. Her heart sank as she saw the fragile, starved creature, struggling to breathe. Without a moment's hesitation, Emily knelt beside the cat, carefully lifting her into her arms. Leo barked softly, his eyes filled with gratitude. Emily, her heart swelling with compassion, could feel the weight of the moment. The cat's fur was still thin, and her body was stiff, but there was life in her yet. Emily rushed her back to her apartment, where she carefully cleaned and wrapped her in soft towels. Leo, his eyes never leaving the cat, paced anxiously around the room. He had done all he could, he had saved her, brought her to safety. Now, it was up to Emily to ensure that she survived. For days, Emily took care of the cat, feeding her small bits of food and giving her water. The cat was still too weak to move, but her eyes showed signs of recognition. She would stare at Leo, blinking slowly, as if understanding that it was he who had brought her here. Leo watched over her every moment, his presence a constant comfort. He would curl up beside her, offering his warmth, though he too was tired and hungry. There were nights when Leo couldn't sleep, his stomach aching from hunger, but he stayed by the cat's side, refusing to leave her. As the days passed, the cat grew stronger, and Leo's joy grew with it. He had found a companion, someone who understood the hardship of the streets, who shared the same quiet loneliness. They had survived together, and now they were healing together. But Leo, despite his relief, couldn't shake the fear that lingered in his heart. What if the cat didn't make it? What if Emily wasn't able to help her in time? One afternoon, as Leo watched the cat stir, he finally allowed himself to relax. The cat, now sitting up, looked up at Leo with her bright, grateful eyes. The bond between them had become something powerful, something more than either of them could have anticipated. Leo's heart swelled as he realized he had done the impossible, he had saved her. And in return, she had saved him, too. Leo wasn't just a homeless puppy anymore. He had found his family. The days had passed, and the cat had made a remarkable recovery. Her fur was fuller, her body stronger, and her once faint mews had grown louder, more certain. Leo, ever by her side, had begun to sense a shift, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. But even in this small sanctuary of safety, danger was never far away. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, a loud crash echoed down the street. Leo's ears perked up, his body stiffening in alarm. He bolted toward the sound, his paws scraping against the pavement as he sprinted down the alley. His instincts screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. The cat, still recovering, lay in her favorite spot near the window, eyes half closed in the warmth of the room. She hadn't been up for a while, her strength still fragile despite the progress she had made. But Leo's urgency filled the air as he rushed back into the apartment, barking loudly. The cat lifted her head, her eyes flickering with concern. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a group of rough-looking men stormed into the apartment. Their faces twisted with aggression as they noticed the small, vulnerable animals in the room. One of them reached for the cat, his hand outstretched. Leo's blood ran cold. Without thinking, he sprang toward the man, teeth bared, protecting his newfound friend. He barked fiercely, his body trembling with adrenaline. The men laughed, amused by the puppy's brave but futile attempt to stop them. One man grabbed Leo by the scruff of his neck, lifting him up, but the little puppy fought with all his might, biting and kicking in an attempt to break free. The cat, frightened and weak, hissed and tried to retreat to the corner, but the men were closing in. Leo, trapped in the man's grip, could feel the heat of panic rising in his chest. He had to protect her. He couldn't let them hurt her. In that moment, Leo made a decision. He had to get them both out of here. He knew the risks, but he couldn't let fear dictate his next move. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Leo twisted in the man's grasp, snapping his jaws shut just inches from the man's hand. The distraction gave him just enough time to break free. With a burst of energy, Leo darted toward the cat, grabbing her by the scruff of her neck and pulling her toward the door. The men, surprised by his sudden escape, yelled in frustration, but Leo was already ahead, running full speed out of the apartment. He could feel the cat's body trembling in his grip as they fled into the night. Leo's heart pounded in his chest as he raced down the street, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The night air burned in his lungs, but he couldn't stop. He had to get them to safety. Leo's paws were raw, his body aching, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the cat. With one final burst of speed, Leo found an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of town, its door hanging loosely on its hinges. He hurried inside, guiding the cat to a quiet corner. As they both collapsed onto the cold, hard floor, Leo's breath was ragged. His tiny body trembled with exhaustion, but there was relief in his eyes. They were safe for now, but the terror that had gripped him still lingered, deep in his chest. He had faced the worst, but in that moment, Leo knew he would face whatever came next, as long as the cat was by his side. He had done the unthinkable, he had risked everything to save her. And now it was their turn to rebuild together. Leo's small body collapsed onto the cold floor of the abandoned building, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The cat, still trembling, curled beside him, her fragile form resting against his warmth. They were both safe, for now, but the fear still lingered in the air, thick with the memory of the terror they had just narrowly escaped. But as the minutes passed, a sense of calm slowly began to wash over them. Leo lay there, his tired eyes never leaving the cat. He had done everything he could, but his heart was still heavy with worry. Was it truly over? Had they truly escaped, or was danger still lurking just around the corner? Then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the abandoned building. Leo's ears perked up, his body stiffening with alarm. The cat, too, lifted her head, her once weak gaze now filled with cautious curiosity. Leo's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the familiar scent, the same warmth that had entered their lives so recently. It was Emily. She appeared in the doorway, her face lit with relief and determination. She had been looking for them, just as she had promised. She had never stopped believing in them. "Leo, there you are," Emily whispered, her voice filled with emotion. She rushed to them, kneeling beside Leo, and gently scooped the cat into her arms. Leo barked softly, his tail wagging, his heart swelling with joy. Emily's arms were warm and safe, and as she cradled both Leo and the cat, they knew in that moment that they had found their home. Together, they were no longer lost. They had a family, one that would always protect them, no matter what. As the weeks passed, Leo and the cat, whom Emily had named Luna, settled into their new life together. Emily's small apartment, once quiet and empty, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, joy, and the occasional playful bark. Leo and Luna had become inseparable, their bond stronger than ever. Each morning, Leo would greet Emily with an enthusiastic wag of his tail, while Luna, now much healthier, would curl up beside him, content and at peace. Their days were filled with warmth and love. Emily made sure both animals were well fed, cared for, and loved beyond measure. She watched as Leo and Luna grew stronger, their playful energy returning as they ran through the apartment or napped together in the sunbeams that filtered through the windows. It was a life that Emily had always dreamed of, one filled with compassion and the joy of being surrounded by animals who had found their forever home. Leo's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. From the scared, hungry puppy who had risked his life to save Luna, he had blossomed into a confident, playful dog who brought light into Emily's life. He had found not just a companion in Luna, but a family with Emily, a family that had given him a place to call home. Luna, too, had flourished. Her once dull eyes now sparkled with the kind of happiness she had never known. She had been given a second chance, not only at survival, but at a life full of love and care. Together, the three of them were proof that miracles could happen when kindness and compassion came together. As they curled up together at the end of another perfect day, Emily thought about how far they had come from the cold streets to this warm, loving home. She smiled to herself, knowing that their story was only just beginning. Leo and Luna's journey is a reminder of the power of love, compassion, and second chances. Every animal deserves a home where they are loved and cared for, and you have the power to make a difference. Consider adopting a pet today or supporting your local animal shelter. Remember, every little act of kindness can change a life.